What if the Incredible Hulk was a 7-year-old Irish kid who fought with a hurling stick? It sounds like a strange comic book pitch, but it's actually the origin story for one of mythology's most brutal and terrifying heroes. What's going on, everyone? My name is Jason Hamilton, and this is Myth HQ, the show where we explore the greatest characters and stories from mythology all around the world. And today we're talking about the Irish demigod Cú Chulainn, a warrior so prone to battle frenzy that his body would literally twist inside out into an unrecognizable monster, making him just as dangerous to his friends as he was to his enemies. Like many heroes, Cú Chulainn's story begins with a messy origin. He was the son of a mortal woman, Dectine, who was the sister of the king of Ulster. But his father was none other than Lugh, the Celtic god of light and mastery. In some stories, Dectine swallows a tiny version of Lugh in a cup of water and becomes pregnant. It's a bit strange, but being the son of a god and a princess meant from day one, this kid was destined for something extraordinary and unfortunately something tragic. The tragedy was locked in when he was just 7 years old. Born with the name Setanta, the boy was living with his foster parents when he overheard a prophecy from the chief druid, Cathbad. The druid declared that any warrior who took up arms on that specific day would earn everlasting fame. Setanta, not one to miss an opportunity, ran straight to his uncle the king and demanded weapons. He was so strong that he broke 15 sets of swords and spears. Finally, the king gave him his own personal weapons, and they happened to hold. But then the druid Cathbad arrived and lamented that the boy had only heard the first half of the prophecy. Yes, the warrior who took up arms that day would be famous forever, but their life would be cut short. Setanta, already more of a hero than a child, simply replied that he would gladly live for a single day so long as his story lived forever, and with that, he sealed his own fate. With his destiny set, Setanta began proving his worth immediately. His most famous name change came from an incident that showed both his incredible power and his deep sense of honor. The boy was invited by his uncle King Conchobar to a feast at the home of a blacksmith named Chulainn. Setanta was in the middle of a game of hurling and told the king he'd catch up later. Conchobar forgot about his nephew and, arriving at the feast, told Chulainn that all his guests had arrived. So Chulainn released his guard dog, a beast so ferocious it took 3 chains and 9 men to hold it back. When Setanta eventually showed up, the hound attacked. With nothing but his hurling stick and ball, the 7-year-old boy killed the massive dog, either by driving the ball down its throat or smashing its head against a stone. Chulainn was devastated. The hound was more than a pet, it was his protection, his livelihood. Seeing the man's grief, Setanta didn't just apologize. Instead, he made an offer. He told Chulainn that until a new puppy could be raised to replace the hound, he himself would serve as Chulainn's guard dog, protecting his home and his lands. The druid Cathbad, hearing this, declared that from that day forward, the boy would be known as Cú Chulainn, the Hound of Chulainn. He began his heroic career by killing a dog, and as we'll see, he would end it in much the same way. Makes me think that maybe he's the guy that killed John Wick's dog, right? Now we get to the Hulk part. Setanta's first taste of real combat happened when he first arrived at the capital, Evan Macha, to join the boy troop of knights in training. Unaware of the custom of asking for the group's protection, he just walked onto their field. The 150 boys took this as a challenge and attacked him all at once. Bad idea. In that moment, Setanta underwent his first Riastrad, or warp spasm. This was a terrifying physical transformation. His body would shake violently and twist around, his legs and feet turned backwards, one eye would sink deep into his skull while the other popped out dangling on his cheek, his mouth would peel back to his ears so wide you could supposedly see his lungs, and his hair stood on end like sharp spikes. In a strange light, the hero light, would blaze from his forehead. In this monstrous state, he wasn't just a boy anymore, he was essentially an engine of destruction, and he easily overpowered all 150 boys. After the frenzy, he demanded they place themselves under his protection, and later, when he returned from his first kill, still in a warp spasm, the king feared he would slaughter everyone in the city. So the men sent out the women of Emain Macha, who bared their chests at him, and Cú Chulainn, despite his monstrous rage, was notoriously modest, and he averted his eyes. In that moment of distraction, the men seized him and dunked him into 3 massive vats of cold water. The first one boiled over instantly and shattered. The second did the same. Only the third vat was able to cool him down, bringing him back to his senses. You can't make this stuff up. Now, I've made it a point not to allow sponsors or affiliates in my videos, and this channel is completely self-funded. I do have one thing I think you'll like though, and that's my fantasy all-access library. It's a huge shared universe I've created with my team where characters and creatures from all of world's mythologies coexist. For example, if you like Celtic stuff, I have this book, which is a loose adaptation of The Fairy Queen by Edmund Spenser, which is 400 years old. So that's what this series is about. You get that in ebook form and all of the audiobooks if I have them, which I do do in the case of this one. So if that sounds interesting, the link is down below. As Cú Chulainn grew, his reputation became so fearsome that it actually got in the way of his love life. He fell for a woman named Emer, but her father, Forgal, wanted nothing to do with this terrifying demigod. So Forgal sent Cú Chulainn on an impossible quest, hoping he'd die. The quest was to train in Scotland under the legendary warrior woman Scathach. Her name meant the shadowy one, and her fortress was a place of myth guarded by magical trials. Cú Chulainn, of course, passed them all. Scathach taught him every art of war, from pole vaulting over fortress walls to underwater combat. But most importantly, she taught him to use her signature weapon, the gaibulg. This was no ordinary spear. It was made from the bone of a sea monster and had vicious barbs. Once it entered the body, the barbs would open up, and the only way to remove the weapon was to literally cut the victim open. It was a weapon of last resort and a guaranteed kill that was as gruesome as it was effective. After his training and a few romantic entanglements that resulted in him fathering a son named Conla with Scathach's rival Aetha, Cú Chulainn returned to Ireland. Emer's father still refused the marriage, so Cú Chulainn stormed his fortress, killed him and the 23 of his men, and took Emer as his wife. It was not a subtle courtship. Cú Chulainn's biggest moment came when he was just 17. It's a tale known as the Táin Bó Cúailnge, hope I'm pronouncing that right, or the cattle raid of Cooley. It's basically the Irish Iliad, and it started over something surprisingly petty. Queen Maeve of Connacht got into an argument with her husband, King Ailill, about who was wealthier. It turned out they were perfectly matched, except Ailill owned a legendary stud bull and Maeve didn't. Her pride wounded, Maeve decided she needed an equally impressive bull, the Dún Cúailnge, the brown bull of Cooley, which belonged to Ulster. When her attempts to borrow the bull failed, she raised a massive army from 4 of Ireland's 5 provinces and invaded. Just one problem for Ulster. At that exact moment, all of its warriors were struck down by an ancient curse. For generations, the men of Ulster were fated to suffer the pains of childbirth at their moment of greatest need. Every single warrior was incapacitated. Every warrior, that is, except for one 17-year-old boy who wasn't old enough to be affected by the curse, Cú Chulainn. For months, he single-handedly defended his entire kingdom against a massive invading army by invoking the right of single combat at a river ford. One by one, he fought and killed the greatest champions Maeve could throw at him. The emotional climax of the Táin is the duel between Cú Chulainn and his foster brother Ferdiad. They had trained together under Scathach and loved each other like brothers. Maeve knew this was her best chance to defeat Cú Chulainn because she had to resort to psychological warfare, plying Ferdiad with promises of wealth, power, and even her own daughter's hand in marriage, while also shaming him into fighting. The duel lasted for 3 days. And on the first 2 days, the fight was almost chivalrous. They would battle all day, but in the evenings they would embrace, tend to each other's wounds, and share food. But on the morning of the 3rd day, they both knew only one would walk away. Ferdiad had the advantage. His skin was like horn and couldn't be pierced by normal weapons. He slowly pushed a wounded and exhausted Cú Chulainn to the brink. With no other choice, Cú Chulainn called for his charioteer to send him the gaibulg, and he launched the terrifying weapon, and it pierced Ferdiad through his one unprotected spot, we'll just say up his butt, expanding inside and killing him from within. Cú Chulainn held his dying brother in his arms, his grief overwhelming. "Ah, Ferdiad," he lamented, "betrayed to death, thou to die, I to remain, ever sad or long farewell." He had won, but the cost was immense. Cú Chulainn isn't just a local hero, he fits into a much larger pattern. Scholars have pointed out the striking parallels between him and other great warriors of Indo-European myth. His story of a divine parent, a choice between a short glorious life and a long forgotten one, and his unconquerable battle rage makes him very similar to the Greek hero Achilles. His warp spasm is a clear parallel to the battle fury of the Norse berserkers. Perhaps the most haunting parallel is with the Persian hero Rostam. In a famous epic, Rostam unknowingly fights and kills his own son, Shorab, only realizing his identity as the boy is dying. This is almost identical to Cú Chulainn's own tragedy. Years after his training in Scotland, his son Conla came to Ireland, and bound by a geas, or taboo, placed on him by his mother Aoife, Conla could not reveal his name. When he defeated every Ulster warrior sent against him, Cú Chulainn himself went to face the mysterious boy. Ignoring his wife Emer's pleas that this could be his son, Cú Chulainn fought and mortally wounded Conla with the gaibulg. Only then did he learn that he had killed his own child, and it was a grief that haunted him for the rest of his short life. Eventually, Cú Chulainn's enemies, many of them the sons of men he had killed, conspired to bring him down. They knew they couldn't beat him in a fair fight, so they used magic and trickery, manipulating his own personal taboos against him. He was bound by 2 conflicting oaths: never to eat the meat of a dog, and never to refuse an offer of hospitality. And on his way to his final battle, 3 old crones offered him a meal of roasted dog. Trapped, he chose to break the taboo of eating dog meat an act that immediately weakened half of his body. But even at half strength, he was a terrifying foe, but he was eventually struck by a spear destined for a king and his intestines spilled out. Knowing his death was near, but wanting to die on his feet, facing his enemies, he tied himself to a standing stone with his own belt. His enemies were so afraid of him that they only dared to approach after a raven, a manifestation of the goddess of war, the Morrigan, landed on his shoulder, signaling that he was truly dead. When one of them stepped forward to behead him, Cú Chulain's sword fell from his dead hand and sliced off the man's own hand in one final act of defiance. In modern times, Cú Chulainn has become a powerful symbol of Irish resilience and sacrifice. A famous bronze statue, the Dying Cú Chulainn, stands in Dublin's, of all places, General Post Office, the headquarters of the 1916 Easter Rising. It commemorates the rebels trying to fight for independence to the ancient defiance of Ireland's greatest mythological hero. Cú Chulainn's story is a perfect example of how complex and compelling these ancient myths can be, which is why I love exploring them here and in my own writing. So if you would like to dive deeper into a world where all of these myths are real, you should definitely check out my group, the Fantasy All Access Library, over on a platform called School. It's where you can get my whole library of mythology-inspired fantasy novels. That includes all ebooks and audiobooks for every upcoming release, which is usually at least one new book a month. We also do weekly live calls where we talk about myths, writing, and world building, and it's the community that funds this channel and lets me do this without sponsors. So if that sounds cool to you, the link is right down below.